I'm Matthew Kurbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is only for educational and entertainment purposes. Enjoy the show. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the second annual Tech Show breakdown. We're still workshopping what we're calling it, but the tech-savvy lawyer and the subscription attorney come together to talk about our experiences at Tech Show this year, and we put this on each of our separate feeds. So, Michael, it's great to do this again with you.
Likewise, and I hope we get to continue to do this every year, that both of us will be able to attend the ABA Tech Show and give our personal reports.
Yeah. You know, it's as long as it's in Chicago. Even if I'm not presenting, I will be there. I think I'm going 14 years strong now.
Oh, okay. Well, does that mean I will not see you at the spring conference in Puerto Rico?
That's correct.
That's a bummer. All right. Well, you could have brought the kid and the family and the missus and had a little mini vacation while you're down there.
We'll get there. We'll get there. But solo practice and all that on top of everything. Well, Tech Show was fun this year. For me, it was my third year in a row as faculty, and I know you were also presenting on a couple of things this year. And so since I think our talks maybe were happening at the same time, so we couldn't go to each other's talks. So we'll also talk about our experiences presenting this year, and it's a whole other ballgame when you're on the faculty.
Absolutely. This was my first year as faculty, and admittedly, I was not prepared mentally, I guess, for the transition of being an attendee to being the faculty. I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved it completely. It was just like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be doing something different this time, because I started attending, I think, in 2019, just before COVID hit. And that what's inspired me to start the blog and the podcast. And then we started returning, in 2022 or 2023, I think, after COVID kind of died down.
Yeah, I think it was hybrid in 22. It was their first in person, but they still had everything virtual. And then 23 was 100% back in person.
That's when I came back 100% in 2023. But I enjoyed visiting Chicago. What did you think of the conference area?
Yeah, I know what you meant. Yeah, it's in a new location.
Mm-hmm.
It was the McCormick Center, which is It's a big space. I think when you ultimately got to there, right? Because getting there was part of the problem. It's remote. It wasn't by all the other fun stuff in the Loop and in like River North and Gold Coast and Streeterville and Chicago. So there used to be a lot of parties, and there still were some activities back up there. But then you had to, if you were staying at the hotel locally, then you had to take an Uber or drive up and find parking. Right. It was a bit of a mess as far as all of that stuff is concerned. But I found parking that was $1 an hour for 12 hours. Yeah.
Wow.
And it was an 8-minute walk to the hotel from that parking space. But then once you get to the hotel, it was like 12 minutes to actually
it was like,
get
it's
to
like
the
a half a mile.
Show floor.
I got all my points in.
I got all my steps, right? And but ultimately when you did get there, it was on the lake. And while it was a little cloudy, it's on the lake, very cool. I thought it was more spread out, which pros and cons, it kind of felt like there weren't as many people, even though we had record attendance numbers because there was more space. But I personally liked the new space once you got there. I liked how the show floor was a little bit easier to navigate and well organized because it wasn't too jam-packed. I liked how some of the presentation rooms were not just level. Some of them were, but they were like more lecture hall. Mm-hmm. And so overall, as far as that space, I really liked that new part of the setup. What about you?
I really enjoyed the fact that the vendor floor was so open air, because we used to be in the basement at the other hotel, at the other conference area, and it just always seemed to be a little bit, I don't know, squished and less inviting. So I very much enjoyed that aspect of it. The location, I thought, needs time to grow. I kind of miss having that Apple store right across the river from us when we were at the other hotel. Of all things, I think I can survive not going to the Apple store in Chicago, that one visit, if you will.
Right.
There did seem to be like a lack of restaurants nearby, but, I think that's sort of a growing area. And like you said, I think the main focus needed to be the conference itself. And that was perfect. It was a little confusing at first about where the other lecture rooms were. They weren't surrounding the vendors on the conference floor, but there was also rooms that I didn't even realize the first day. So I had missed the first morning speech that I was planning on going to, and then like I was supposed to be doing my presentation next that late morning, and then I think another one. Actually, then I had two others the next day, but it was very nicely done in the sense that ABA puts on a great tech show. The conference was fantastic. I do like the new area. I just like you said, I wish it wasn't a half a mile away.
Yeah, and I think the contract from talking to some people on the board, it sounds like maybe 2 more years at a minimum, something
I
like
heard
that.
1 more year at a minimum. I heard 2 years at a minimum. I mean, I would not have a problem it staying there. It was easy to get to in the sense of I just took an Uber from the airport to the hotel, and I just would like to see more being built around it, and I'm sure in time it will be.
Yeah, I follow all those legal tech journalists who have that weekly roundtable. And while I don't
Hmm.
always catch the roundtable, I did hear them talking about how there's already plans for at least next year. The big vendors, your Clios, your File Vines,
Oh,
your My
right,
Case, they're
right.
going to get like sponsored golf carts or something to like drive people back and forth. Like they're looking at it as a sponsorship opportunity. So I definitely look forward to taking some of those next year.
I'm such an odd duck that when I park somewhere like going to the grocery store or the mall or whatever, I don't mind parking out a little ways away, just sort of have to deal with other cars hitting me and hitting the car and whatever. So like I don't mind the walk. I won't mind the walk while I'm there. Because like I said earlier, I want the points for my watch, but quite frankly, I think we're just off topic. What did you think about the vendors? What did you think about the focus that they had?
Yeah, well, I really liked the space, and
Mhm.
I think there was no one vendor that didn't have enough space. And I think
Right.
one of the
Oh yeah.
problems, right, with like the last venue was like some of these new vendors that maybe even are startups, but they didn't get into
Mhm.
Startup Alley.
Right.
Uh, they, they get these tiny little booths that you can't really do
Right.
anything with, right? So at least here, I felt like everybody had room to breathe,
Definitely.
which was nice because then you could, you could bring a few more people. You could have some nice signage, and I really think
Mhm.
everybody has some really nice signage. In particular, there was I think Clio sponsored the pets thing to
Yes.
like
Yes.
go pet the therapy dogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a fun addition. I think maybe they've done that in years past, but like right now, like at this show, you walk into that space and like boom, like there it was. Like it was impossible to miss that. I liked how when you came in too, there were like there were these theaters that were set up, like these sort of open air versions of like a lecture space with a
Right. Right.
screen. And so the vendors, I was only able to attend like a couple of them for a few minutes each, but the vendors got to have dedicated time to talk to like and demo their product and talk
Mhm.
about like things at a high level that their product helps solve. And so that the vendors got to do that in these open spaces that was not far, that was like very close, like kitty corner from where
Mhm.
their space was. I think that was an excellent setup, and it was a great way to hear other people ask questions too about it. Because like when you're just going up and talking to a vendor, like they kind of only talk to people one on one,
Right.
and you might be interested in what somebody else has to ask questions about. So I really like that setup. As far as the vendors themselves, there were like the classics, right? Like you had your Clios, your Filevine, your Finipay, all doing their thing. There were cappuccino machines. There was everything, right? There was all these
Wait.
press
Wait. Where
machines.
were the cappuccino machines? I missed that.
I forget which vendor it was, but there were definitely a couple of vendors that were doing coffee.
Somebody asked me
100%.
if Cleo was doing the cappuccino this year, and I thought I didn't see one this year.
I didn't see one at Clio's, and
Okay.
I didn't spend as much time with the vendors as I have in years past because there were only a handful of new vendors, and I really wanted to check out some of the new vendors that I
Right.
hadn't
Right.
heard of before. But as far as like the classics, like they were all there. They had swanky setups, like cool
Yep.
things, and Affinipays, which owns my case, their
Mhm.
competition with Clio's dogs was they had like a gaming area,
Oh.
right? And you
Okay. Right.
like there
Right.
was like a claw machine where it was like play until you
Oh yeah. Yeah.
win,
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yep.
right?
Yep.
They had like our classic couple arcade games. They had like skee ball, and they had like all these like arcades all branded with Affinipay stuff. So my kid now has a stuffy with this little Affinipay shirt, and I thought about taking off the shirt, but it's so darn cute on this thing. Like they knew what they were doing. Like the swag game, like the vendors really had a great swag game for this conference, in my opinion.
Well, the puppies were from I have it, I believe, right here. Yes. They were from Ultimate Canine Dog Training. They do obedience, basic manners, and behavioral problems. And those dogs were absolutely fantastic. That being said, everyone probably saw me looking to my right as I was looking on my website. I put in our chat an image. I don't know if the image is popping up itself.
I just pulled it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Of me playing with the dogs. They were so soft and cuddly and incredibly well behaved. And it's always just so disheartening for me when a dog kind of comes over and just lays against me like, hey, I found my new owner, which happened with our last dog here. But, that was, I love when conferences like ours, you know, brings dogs to be petted because it's a nice, relaxing thing. It's why we're a very dog friendly office here. But what I was wondering is, what did you think of the overall themes that the vendors were bringing to us? Themes as into what was integrated into their products.
Yeah, well, it's not. It wasn't so different from last year, right? AI.
Hmm.
AI is the topic du
Hmm.
jour. How are we leveraging large language models or integrating AI to do this or do that? And I even found there were a couple of just tech consultants who were on
Hmm.
the show floor
Yes.
that had their
Yes.
own booths that were like, we're going to help you use AI, or use these other tools, or even build you custom software that's not necessarily custom from scratch. But if you are only good, and they always try to do like no code first, but maybe some light coding on top of that, like that was really interesting to see that it's still a very AI focused, but a little bit more about not just how we're using AI, but how that AI helps the lawyer or how you can do that. Now, what I still wish I would have seen more of is I wish I would have seen more companies willing to talk about how this is going to help you be more profitable as a fixed fee or subscription based firm. And
They're
I've
not
still
there
seen
yet.
they're
They're not
not
there
there.
yet.
They're still talking about how we're going to reduce time spent on non-billable hours, which I
Hmm.
think is still valuable. But very quickly after using some of this tech for speeding up non-billable hours, you could lawyers are smart. They're going to be like, oh, I could use this to reduce, substantive legal work time too. Oh, shoot, what am I going to do? Which is why I was happy to see AltFee, winner of last year's of 2024's pitch
Yep.
competition. They were back at TECHSHOW, and I talked to them a couple of times, and they said they had a lot of people stop by their booth now in this new paradigm of how do I charge if all this substantive legal work is being made faster with all the other legal tech tools on the show floor. What do I do? Well, AltFee is there to help you price those legal services. So very cool to see them. What was your experience with some of the vendors and their new offerings this year?
What I thought was interesting, and I'm sort of going to jump to the side a little bit from the startup alley, how many of the new companies are implementing AI and trying to start businesses based on that AI, especially in the legal field. And I'm generally impressed. And what I thought I saw more of from, say, last year is that from the startup alley and including all the vendors, many of the vendors on the floor, is that they're now providing more actionable items. Don't talk to me in general about, how great AI is and how wonderful it is and all the neat things you can do unless you can show me actionable items. What is it that I can do specifically? And how do I do these things? And, to be honest, that's been one of my complaints about the ABA Tech Show in the past is it's like you talk about all these wonderful things, but you don't tell me how to do it. And, if you'll forgive me, I'm going to sort of go into the presentations that I did.
Yeah.
And, the first one, actually, I'm calling up the name so I don't say it incorrectly, is how to leverage video to build your brand, dominate SEO, and attract the best clients. I did that with Patrick Wright. And in that presentation, I provided actionable items like this is what you do, this is how you do it. Now, of course, it's going to vary for every person. And, it was very well received. And including the other two presentations that I did that I co-presented that I'll talk about in a little bit, is that I provided and made sure that were actual items, that there were specific things you could do that you take away. Because again, telling me about, all the wonderful things without showing me how it's done doesn't do anything for me. I am still I think a lot of the vendors still rely on the cloud too much. And I don't like having a solid copy of my office on the computer I'm working on, because if the internet goes down, the power goes out, you're screwed. Or if you're flying on a flight that it's like, oh yeah, we have Wi-Fi, but you're traveling over a particular international border, or the Wi-Fi is not working that day, or there's clouds overhead, you can't get your work done. That and security, that I need to know that whatever I'm doing is secure. Whether it's the data that I have, in the office or in the cloud. And, I just don't understand how firms can just work solely on the cloud without having some sort of hard workable data set on the computers at their office. I mean, I think everyone knows I use something called Daylight. It's done by a company, Market Circle. They're an app-only company. They built it on a Mac. It's for a Mac. It's solid. And it integrates nicely with all of the Apple products that I use. So, it's a great CRM that I turned into an LPM. But, I have a copy here. I have a copy backed up in the cloud. I have a copy on 2 other computers that I have access to, heavens forbid something happens. And of course, there's a backup on my time machine. We do the multiple backups in 2 different locations. And I just wish everyone was not going in that direction. Not to get into too much into politics, but we see what's going on in the federal government right now. And a lot of that information is being, shared, maybe not with the right parties. And if we were to ever lose our unencrypted backups, in the cloud, we're going to have a problem. So hopefully I'm not too much on a soapbox.
Yeah. No. I have, because I'm in Google Workspace, I have all my most important documents available for you to, I have the setting turned on that I could access them and use them when there's no internet connection.
Right.
For exactly that purpose, right?
So you have a local copy.
Always on my iPad in particular, which I have the new M4 iPad. So that's been a fun toy that I got, last year.
So yes, as we were talking offline, you have the new Mac 4 Mini and the iPad M4. Is that the Pro or is that the Air?
It's the Pro.
Okay.
And it's my first Pro because my last iPad was a Gen 3 iPad, Michael. Gen 3 in law school.
Holy cow.
Okay.
Oh,
and I was a Surface Pro X user when I was in the Microsoft ecosystem, and that I still have it. It was always a personal device. I gave it to my wife after I got the iPad, but I still love that form factor. And frankly, it actually still has, in my opinion, it still has a lighter and thinner bezel and super solid form factor, even compared to my M4 iPad Pro. When you attach that Magic Keyboard to the iPad Pro, it is a beast. It is heavy.
Oh yeah.
It gets thick, it gets heavy, and the Surface Pro X by comparison is still thinner and lighter. Now it's not half as powerful or as fast or could do everything that I wanted to do. But yeah, last year, and this is actually part of my talk while we're talking about some of our presentations, I gave a talk on Thursday called the Tech Stack Deep Dive for the Modern Virtual Law Firm.
And I wanted to attend that. I'm sorry I couldn't.
I mean, this is the part of being faculty, right? The downside is you want to go to the talks that are happening during your talk. So I talked about not just the tech that I have and that I'm using, and when you really break it down, I never thought I had this much stuff. But I have a lot of stuff, and I have to give a presentation on it. I called it a deep dive, so I got to go deep. I went down to the covers for my cables deep in terms of hardware, right? The everything I use down to the plug, down to the wire. I talked about all of it. And I also talked about where to buy it and how to get good deals on it, because it's not always just about what stuff do you want to buy and how to buy it. I showed what it cost if you were to go out and buy it all today.
Right,
the hardware, it was $17,000 worth of hardware. And half of that is easily Apple stuff, probably more than half, right? And
Right.
unfortunately, you're not going to get a discount on the Apple stuff unless you buy used or refurbished, which you totally can,
Right.
or like Amazon Warehouse, right? And I talked about Amazon Warehouse, like open boxed, unused kind of deals. But I also talked about how when you're making a new hardware upgrade in particular, planning around the financials of that is actually really important. And so one of the things that I did, I was looking at all the new tech coming out, the new iPad, the new iPhone, the M4 Pro, Mac Mini. I was running an old M1. I mean, old. It was like, 3.5 years old, but like, the way these chips are advancing, I mean, especially Michael, but I was like, you don't just want to go and buy all that stuff unless you're being strategic about it. So I also talked about all the different sorts of, I didn't give financial advice, just financial information
Mm-hmm.
about all the different credit cards and the different bonus packages and things
Okay.
like when signing up for a new card, right? So like when I had not signed up for the Business Inc. Unlimited card through Chase yet. And at the end of last year, they were running a promo where if you spend $6,000 in 3 months, you get $900 back. So that's
That's
a
pretty good.
great deal. And then 1.5% on all purchases, right? So I wanted to get that card eventually anyway, but I waited until I was ready for a hardware upgrade to make all those
Right.
purchases. And since they're Apple products, you're not going to get a discount on them anyway, unless you're
Mm-hmm.
buying in bulk, which as a solo, I'm not. So so that's how I planned my purchase of these upgrades, these hardware upgrades around, I would easily be able to hit that $6,000 threshold buying just five
Right.
Apple things, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
and that was part of my talk. And so I won't go into more detail with that
Well,
on that
I
talk.
want, hold on. I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So, are you using the Thunderbolt 4 or 5 or both? Wires, going back to cables for a second.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I'm not actually using Thunderbolt for cables precisely, but I'm using USB-C 4 cables, which have
Okay. Yep.
Thunderbolt
Yep.
capacity for the
Okay.
video audio feeds. And
Yep.
they are more expensive, but they're not as expensive as true Thunderbolt 4 cables. And the
Mm-hmm.
only reason why I'm not using true Thunderbolt 4 or 5 cables is they are not long enough because my Mac Mini M4 Pro is in my main office. I'm in my studio recording here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could purchase longer USB 4 capable wires that are still high quality and transfer 4K video and audio at high rates.
But
So
are you
that's what
worried
I'm
about
using.
degradation of the signal from such a long cable?
Absolutely, yes. But I'm paying for it, Michael. I mean, this is like a $50 cable when you could buy
Right, right.
cables for like $10.
Okay, so then I have to ask, who do you prefer to buy cables from?
I did a lot of research into this and I
Okay.
landed on literally the only company that I could find that sells 15-foot Thunderbolt,
Okay.
USB 4 cables, and it's called Angus Play.
Okay, I think I've heard of them. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, and so I have two of them now. I purchased one to make sure that it works and it does the
Mm-hmm.
job that it needs to do. It does, so I bought another one.
So it's funny, I buy from CDW or Max
Mhm.
Sales, which make great Thunderbolt 4 and Thunderbolt 5. And, I'm moving over to Thunderbolt 5. And as I think, I talked offline, I'm planning on upgrading my Mac Studio, which has an M1 chip Ultra to an M3 Ultra. And I'm probably going to get some more RAM. So it's going to go from Thunderbolt 4 ports to Thunderbolt 5 ports. But added to that, I just bought a Cal Digit hub that has Thunderbolt 5 going in, Thunderbolt 5, 3 going out. It's bi-directional. I've got, one in and three out. So it gives me a couple extra ports to plug into. And, the type of work that you and I do, we're trying to transfer a lot of data back and forth. Now, whether or not the average Joe Schmo attorney needs that kind of stuff, probably not. And they would probably be fine with, our, my soon to be your last machine, if you will, and, to be fine being productive because mostly they're doing is, word processing, some internet searching, video watching, maybe audio listening when it refers to documents and other materials from their cases. But yeah, we're probably spending a little bit more than the average person does. But remember, with the Apple card, since we're just talking about Apple for a second, you get 3% back, which I know you got 66.7 back with the $900 for $6,000, which is still a better deal than what I got.
Yeah.
And also, don't forget that you could become an Apple Business member for free. Now, that's not going to get you a lot, but as I've touted before, it gets you the extra white glove handling. And, every once in a blue moon, you've spent enough that they can, give you a little discount on something.
I definitely bought it through my Apple Business,
Mm-hmm.
my free Apple Business account. I only got 1% back on the credit card I got 1.5% back on top of what I
Okay.
actually spent, right? Because I bought it with the new card, of course.
Right.
And, but another thing I talked about though is for folks who don't want to buy it from Apple and they're not taking advantage of that particular card deal,
Mm-hmm.
if you're an Amazon Prime member, then you could get a free Amazon Business Prime account.
Okay.
And then you could get the 5% back business credit card, because the one thing about the Apple credit card is it's 3% back on Apple, but there's no business version. You have to reimburse yourself. And some people,
Right.
I'm not comfortable doing that. But then you could get 5% back on Apple purchases through Amazon.
Okay.
But you're not going to be able to get the customization or the white glove service, and you won't be able to get the exact specs that you want. But for some lawyers, like you said, Michael, that don't care about it as much as you
Right.
and me, maybe that's good enough, and that's 5% back. And when you sign up for that card, you'll get $200 or $300 Amazon gift card when you get that card. So it's something.
But I have to ask, can you still get the Apple Care?
That's a good question, because I obviously got Apple Care when you're spending that much money. For
Right.
$99, it's like a no-brainer at that point.
Right.
But I as long as you're buying new, I suspect that you can still, after you sign into your iCloud account on Apple, I think they'd let you purchase it if it's a new product and not a used Amazon warehouse deal, which I think you could still get 5% back on it if it's Amazon warehouse, believe it or not.
Okay. Well, anyway, I think we've gotten off topic a little bit, but that's
Well,
okay,
it's all Tech Show related stuff, though. Like, we talked about this at Tech Show, right?
But you and I are Apple geeks, so hopefully the listener will be understanding. Did you have any other presentations?
Yeah, I had one other presentation. I will say, the room was packed for the tech stack deep dive. So I actually think that's why I think they will enjoy that conversation we just had, Michael, because there is a hunger to talk about tech stacks and not about here's 5 products that do this thing. It's like, no, I think lawyers want a tastemaker. They want, here's what I'm using, here's how to get it, here's how I'm using it.
And if you recall from all the interviews that I do on my podcast, the first thing I ask the guests is, was your current tech set up? Because I do believe others like to hear how people are, grinding the sausage, as they say.
Yeah, and then
good.
So not a lot for me to cover on the second talk that I did, because longtime listeners know, and if they've heard me on your podcast the couple of times that I've been on, they know it was about shifting the billing paradigm from hourly to subscription. I did give that talk with Joshua Lennon, who is the Clio lawyer in residence, and he did a great job, and we actually had good chemistry presenting up there, also considering the presentation came together last minute. But I was surprised that when I was talking on my own, that topic drew a bigger crowd than me and Joshua Lennon talking about shifting the from billable hour to fixed fee and subscription. So
people
that's all.
want
I'll
to learn how to do these things.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really important that we provide them actionable items. So from your first talk, what is the number one thing that people need to remember?
You don't need to buy everything or subscribe to all the software at once. And I'll link to in my show notes here, I'll link to my slides, my Google slides, so you can see I have a suggested rollout of what stuff to buy first and what software to subscribe to first, and recommendations for why you should do it in that way. So you don't need everything at once is the one takeaway. And I actually gave actionable steps, just like you, Michael, about here's the course of action to take, the first steps to take. Let me tell you about the brand new sponsor for Law Subscribed, Paxton. I've been using Paxton as my legal AI tool for over 2 years. I continue to evaluate and demo other legal AI tools in the market and still decide to stick with Paxton because of its reliability, its accuracy, its ease of use, affordability, and they do not lock you into a long-term contract. Now, as a transactional and fractional general counsel attorney, I'm using Paxton for all of my substantive and non-substantive legal work, whether that's legal research, analysis, drafting, or enhancing existing legal work product. In the time it used to take me to draft and analyze legal documents, now, after a little bit of back and forth with Paxton, I have something ready to go in minutes that used to take hours or even days. While I'm no longer a litigator, I could see how valuable Paxton would be when researching a new issue, preparing for a deposition, drafting a motion, or going to trial. So if your firm would benefit from using Paxton as your legal AI tool, then make sure to use the link in the description when signing up to let Paxton know I sent you. That's all about our new sponsor. Now back to the show. But anyway, Michael, those are my two talks. That covers my presentations. Anything else you want to say about the video one and then the other two talks that you gave?
Well, on the video one, I had a lot of information to share. To be honest, I didn't get through halfway of the presentation. And, as I mentioned before, I was really flattered and excited to hear that people were walking away with actionable items. And that being said, I've got more actionable items. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to represent that presentation on YouTube for free. So we're going to sort of align with Tech Savvy Saturdays that I'm starting as of August 19th. The third Thursday of every month will be a free webinar. People are welcome to attend. It's all about, half will be about lawyers using technology, giving an example like a speaker. This week, I'll happen to be talking about Text Expander. I'll have other guests come in, and also the last half of the presentation will be, or the webinar, will be an open Q&A. So if you have a tech question about something that you're using or something that you're thinking about using, sort of a community triage, trying to help out everyone. And then lastly, I'll end with about 5 or 10 minutes worth of cool things found that either I or others will provide and sort of do a little show and tell. Those again will be free, every the third Saturday of every month, and 2 weeks thereafter, I'll be sure to post that on YouTube so that everyone can watch it if they didn't have a chance to actually participate. Um, that being said, and I'm looking to my right here at my notes, that there were two other presentations that we did or that I was involved with. The second was innovations in client intake, leveraging technology for better outcomes. It was co-presented with Patrick Wright. He was the lead on that, and he gave some really good examples of how to use AI and other tools to make intake more efficient. And one thing that you want to remember is that whatever workflow you have, you want to make sure that the information you're putting in basically is only done once. Not only because it saves time, but also it provides consistency throughout your entire CRM, your client relations management, and also your law practice management programs. Because you don't want to accidentally, type in the wrong social security number by accident as you're copying and pasting and redoing things, because that removes human error, and then ideally that makes you the better attorney and your clients will be happier and you'll be doing better in court. The second was, and this was sort of a pitch hit I did with Ruby Powers on the Mobile Lawyer's Guide to Thriving, practicing law anytime, anywhere. That was, being mobile and taking your work with you. Matt, I know you work on a laptop. I have both a desktop and a laptop. The laptop is specifically for travel and also to serve as a backup if needed. And it's important that you remember that you maintain your security while you're traveling, that you're using a VPN of sorts to make sure that people can't pry into the work that you're doing across the internet. In my opinion, though, I really do believe that if you're going to use an LPM, that you maintain an accessible copy offline on all of your devices. And that's also another great way to do sort of a secondary backup. I have a complete copy of my Office on my laptop. I have one on my Mac Studio. I even have one on my Mac Mini, which is serving as a sort of a background server. And remember to take things like, backup batteries, enough cords. Remember that when you're going through borders on international travel, to make sure you lock and secure your devices. I know some people prefer to, take a brand new device or a completely emptied device that has, no programs, no data whatsoever when you're crossing the borders, because, you may be exposed to a search and seizure, whether it's, this country or another. and you're worried about privilege and confidentiality and whatnot. And, I understand that. But if your device's security, if you have encrypted hard drive, if you have a secure password, if you power off as you're going through, borders, you should be okay. But you never know if you're going to have a problem with that new device that you're crossing the border with just to get set up. I mean, what if whatever happens that your internet is slow? When my wife and I were in Mexico, the long story short, the internet wasn't working well, and ended up getting on my 3G through AT&T. Now, mind you, it was 3G because that was what was offered to me. I didn't have the option for 4G or 5G in the middle of Mexico, which was fine because basically all I was doing was you know sending email. I may have had to log into something to file something, but I had everything that I needed with me. So some of the pros and cons of each, and you got to make the best decision for you. But I have not bought into the whole, you know, buy a new machine, and then bring it over with you and download everything while you're there. Especially because, quite frankly, like when I'm traveling, I'm usually working on the airplane. If I have a 7 hour flight to wherever in Europe, I'm going to use some of that time to, write some briefs, maybe do a little, drafts of emails, etc. But all of the presentations that I participated in, not only did I enjoy doing them, it was clear that my co-presenters enjoyed doing them. And it was fantastic that the audience was so interested, involved, and clearly hungry for this information.
Yeah,
And
Tech Show is a legal tech nerd's dream, whether you're on the presenting side or you're on the receiving end. All those are fantastic tips. I very rarely travel outside of the Chicagoland area, but when I do for, like, say, a conference or something, like, depending on when this goes live, this may go live just after I've been in Napa for the American Association of Matrimonial Lawyers annual symposium. Woof, that's a mouthful. They're flying me out there to talk about emerging trends in technology for lawyers, right? Even though I'm not a family law attorney, they could all benefit from leveraging technology, and they all maybe can't make it out to Chicago for Tech Show, right? So what's nice for them is I will be doing an improved version of some presentations from Tech Show because you get feedback, you get questions from the audience, and you could always make improvements to the presentation, just like you're doing with the video one. There's all this stuff to cover, so I'll be in a similar boat. But when I'm there, I will be using all the similar things that you just talked about to make sure, like, I have all my files I'll need to be in offline mode and available offline and all that with my iPad Pro. That'll be good to have. And yeah, and even when I'm in a hotel, another tip, and I'm curious to get, I'm sure, I think maybe I've even heard you say this on your podcast before, but I hotspot my phone in the hotel. I don't use the hotel Wi-Fi. It's just, and I'm not even dealing with that secure of stuff, but I'd rather, you never know who might be getting in when you're connecting to hotel Wi-Fi.
Matt, I gotta ask, do you have two different devices? One in case on one carrier, in case that carrier goes down, and have the other carrier accessible or vis-a-vis?
No, right now I've just got the one device that's personal and for work, but tell me about the two different carrier strategy.
So I have AT&T on my office phone and I have Verizon on my blog phone. Reason being is that in case AT&T goes down, I can still use Verizon and vis-a-vis. And I travel usually with both of them. When I say travel, I mean if I'm traveling outside the DMV, because that's when usually I'm not going to have access to hotspots and hotel Wi-Fi's, because you never know. But when you're in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, it's not that hard to usually find a Starbucks if you really need it. But it's just to make sure that I can always be connected if I need to.
That is definitely one approach. I'm sure they're both happy. AT&T and Verizon are happy to have your money either way, right? And it's not a bad idea. Look, I've got two LLCs, right? I can have a firm phone, and my podcast, consulting company, I could have a phone. So that's definitely an interesting thought. I'm going to file that away. I mean, right now, This was another tip in one of my talks. I think about it more from like a security standpoint. I think some lawyers have asked me that before. Well, why you have one phone for your personal and one for work? Because you got to keep work things, personal things separate. What if your kid wants to play with your phone or your spouse or whatever? And so for me, I use guided access, which is a feature in iOS. If you go into your accessibility features, you could turn on guided access, and when you press the lock button 3 times, it locks it into just that app. So say my kid wants to scroll through pictures of herself or her cousin, she can't accidentally, send a client an email or delete a bunch of emails that are really important, right? So yeah, right now just the one phone, but that's an interesting thought. And I know with my iPad, I got the version that lets me opt into the mobile and have the data plan. So I may even consider having another data plan just for that iPad.
I use AT&T, and the program I'm on allows me to have various numbers of devices and then a shared pool of data. Like I have like 30 gigabytes a month, and then of like fast internet speed. And then I think now the way it works is once I've used that up, then I'll just go to a slower like 3G, which is fine. Quite frankly, I don't think I've ever used the entire 30, even on that trip to Mexico where I was gone for like 7 or 8 days. But one thing you might want to consider is if you're going to go with a if you're going to add, I should say, data to that iPad, maybe you might want to go with a different carrier just to make sure you sort of have that balance, just in case one goes out, you still have the other one working. Now, as for having, a child access my phone or my wife or family or whatever, I have a hardened rule that basically you can't because sometimes I'm known as the mean Uncle Mike because I won't let you play with the games on my phone. And I'm like, I got client data on there, and I don't want you to ever inadvertently get access to it or do something silly like write an email to the judge about he's a silly clown who wears a bozo red hair and nose. But also like you said, of course, my situation is a little bit different. No offense to anyone, I have no kids. You've got a 4-year-old daughter who has that grabby, I'd like to see what daddy's playing with kind of thing, which and so putting that security on there is actually an excellent idea, to make sure that yeah, they can play with it, but they only have access to one thing.
Yep, and I don't even remember. I think the iPhone Tips app is where I learned about that. So like, don't poo-poo the Tips app and let those notifications stay on, because every so often with iOS updates, it will give you a, hey, have you tried out this feature? Have you tried out that feature? So I think that's where I found out about that one from.
One tip about the iPhone that I came across is you can click the power button 5 times, and that will go to a passcode lock screen, or you can click on the volume and power button for 2 seconds, and that will also do the same. It will securely lock your phone, requiring your passcode, which comes in handy when someone who's coming up to you may try to gain access to your stuff. And if you're stopped by the police, they can still make you put your thumb or your face in front of the phone to unlock it if that is what is the first line that's currently active. If that makes any sense. Okay.
Well, I will tell you that that is a great tip. I got it right away. I think that makes fantastic sense. And it's a great little hack to know how to do something like that. Speaking of little hacks, though, Michael, so I have an idea of want to talk about for my takeaway, but like if you just could talk about like one thing you're looking forward to checking out that you learned at Tech Show, or if you could sum it all up into one point, like what would that be?
I want to just re emphasize my major concerns about using AI. I mean, what I'm seeing is great and it's developing, but everyone needs to remember it's a tool. It's not going to replace human judgment or human thought or human decision making. In the end, what you put, as they say, pen to paper is your responsibility. So, lawyers like to say things in three. I can't emphasize that. One, you check your work. And, again, check your work. And then again, check your work. As I tell my clerks, I'm paying you to review the work you've done to make sure it's correct. Um, Make sure that you have security on the devices that you're using and the systems and programs that you're using. Remember, the free chat GPT will be learning off the information you provide. So you don't want to be providing PII, personally identifiable information. And then, lastly, back up, back up, back up. Because if you don't do that and you have a system, corruption issue or a virus or worse yet a hacker, you may be screwed and you'll be on the hook for that. So my big takeaway is, AI is clearly here to stay. AI is going to be a great assistant, but don't forget some of the common ethical steps you need to take to make sure that you're doing everything properly.
And my final takeaway actually dovetails right off of that. So I'm really glad that you went first. But so we all kind of want AI to be able to do everything for us and then we could still make decent money, right? But it's not magic. It's not replacing our judgment anytime soon, if at all. We'll see. So my favorite takeaway from ABA Tech Show is actually an unsexy use of AI. And that is a tool that they call themselves Belt AI, and I think that's the URL, belt.ai. For folks who went to Tech Show and got on their email list, they're giving 90 days free, but I think it's 30 days free for anybody else. They just launched their Google Workspace integration, so I'm sure there's going to be some, like it's in beta, it's not going to be perfect, but what it is leveraging large language models. They integrate with your email and your messaging, and they automatically put things on your calendar. And as somebody who lives in the time blocking space where I try to put all my to-do items in my calendar, even if you don't bill by the hour, like that is non-billable time. Or even if you do bill by the hour, that's non-billable time, right? Like that's amazing. Now you might think, well, I can't have an AI inside my email. There's confidential client communications in there. Arguably, it's not confidential anyway because it's unencrypted. It's not protected by two-factor authentication. It's a whole other conversation. The founders are previous legal tech founders. And so they're aware of making sure that privacy and security is number one. And so, I haven't read through their privacy policy in terms of service and stuff yet. I haven't quite signed up for it at the time of recording, though I plan to very, very soon. Is very exciting for me. And that's like an unsexy use of AI. Now, for the billable hour lawyers out there, which just doesn't appeal to me at all, but they also are creating time entries based on that stuff. And so all you have to do is put in how long it took, and the entry is already written. And so that's really something. And I'm really excited about that kind of AI tool rather than the more generative analytical one. And it's just putting stuff in my calendar. Amazing.
Well, not to go off too much on a tangent, have you used timing before?
No.
So timing is a Mac program. I'm sure there are Windows versions of it that basically, if you allow it, it will kind of keep track of what you're doing. So if you're working on a Microsoft Word document, the particular document, say for 2 hours, it will keep track of that. So you can go back at the end of the day, go, okay, I was clearly working here, drafting 2 hours for here. I was doing some emailing here. I was on my VoIP phone from X to Y on a particular client call. That kind of keeps track of that. So I could see how Belt.ai would be the next step of that, doing some of that automation for you, sort of taking that information and saying, okay, here's your time of your billable hours. You got to approve this and maybe add some annotations to this. I wouldn't be surprised if timing does something with AI as new programs are coming out about, AI, and this is what we can do with information you already have. I'm sure programs that are, if you will, grandfathered back in the day before AI, they'll be adding AI too, which is also what we saw with a lot of the programs on the vendors floor about the services they provided, like Clio and MySpace, amongst others that are, adding in AI integrations, to help us with our work. And, we just got to make sure, like I said, that it's secure and that we check our work.
Yeah, and I've been looking for I'm currently subscribed to a tool called Before Sunset.ai, and that promises to take your to-do list and use an AI agent and put it in your calendar. The problem is it only does it for the day like that you're doing it. You can't do it into the future, which is what I want. And so Belt at least promises to be able to do that. And so I'm very much looking forward to it. And another cool thing about Belt is they do have a product built for lawyers, and I think it's belt.ai/legal. But they are also targeting the broad market of any professional service provider that would benefit from having an AI tool that securely is able to take your email messages and put to-do items on your calendar. So they're priced accordingly. So it's like less than $20 a month. And at Tech Show, that's a great deal.
Oh yeah. Well, so what programs does it work with? What operating systems does it work with?
It primarily integrates with Microsoft and Outlook. And but they are just launching their Google Workspace integration, which is where I would need it anyway. I did try to sign up for it, but they were mid-launch. And so I did get an email from them today at the time of recording that I should now sign up for my free trial. So there you go.
Well, let me know how that goes. Please keep me posted.
Great. So if folks wanted to follow up, stay in touch with you, Michael, where do they do that?
Well, they can reach me at Michael DJ at the TechSavvyLawyer page. And also, I encourage them to come out for the Tech Savvy Saturdays starting April 19th. They are free. Just request that you get a passcode to make sure we keep, people who want to, attend for free are, genuine and sincere. And we just don't get anyone just kind of like, swinging by and maybe inadvertently interrupting things.
All right, great. And as always, www.lawsubscribe.com to subscribe to the podcast if you want those email updates on new episodes. Otherwise, Law Subscribed on every podcast app.
And of course, don't forget the TechSavvyLawyer page podcast that can be found on any of your podcast subscription apps. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate this opportunity, and I look forward to doing it with you again next year.
Yes, likewise. Speaking of, registration is available. Everybody should go to TECHSHOW.com. And the dates are March 25th through March 28th of 2026. So TechShow.com, you can register today.
Yes, and so just note that it's earlier than it was this year because I think that was the normal time frame that they have Tech Show. And because of the hotels and whatever, they had to have it a little bit later this year. So, it's going to be approaching on us very soon. So don't forget, make sure you sign up, and we both hope to see you there.
See you next year.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. The best way to get in touch is to follow and message me on LinkedIn. To get extra content, subscribe to the newsletter at www.lawsubscribe.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber to get episodes and content early. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.